Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Jonny Coker. In today's episode, we'll be welcoming in Las Cruces Police Chief Jeremy Story for a discussion on public safety. One of the central parts of that public safety discussion is bail reform. New Mexico changed the way that it deals with pretrial detention in 2016, but some in the state are concerned that the conditions of release are too loose. KRWG scholar Noah Race has more in this report.
Vic Villalobos loves dogs. So much so that his two businesses, Fetching Designs and Las Cruces Dock Diving, are either dog-oriented or themed. However, in recent months, Villalobos has experienced some challenges that have left him barking up a storm over property crime.
We've seen probably the biggest increase in crime over the last, 4 to 5 years is when it's really started growing, especially with all the vagrants and homelessness that we see around us. That's really when it first started, and we deal with it. It's probably more like a weekly basis between the two businesses.
Villalobos says his security cameras caught the moment when a man broke into multiple businesses, including his.
They broke in, they vandalized. I think they pooped in one of the places, and then we caught him here inside of ours.
Villalobos said the police then took the man into custody. This was far from the first time the man in the video has had run-ins with the law. Through a public records request, KRWG found that since May of 2023, he has been arrested 12 times on charges ranging from shoplifting and burglary to battery and assault on a peace officer. Villalobos says that much of this reoffending can be traced back to a 2016 amendment to the New Mexico Constitution.
I believe the bail reform started, I think, 2016, 2017, somewhere right in there. And, it just makes it where the judge is just making the decision. Heck, I don't even know if some of these people are actually even getting in front of a judge because, the guy that broke into our offices, he had broken into other offices at 7 o'clock in the morning and then broke into our place at 10:30 in the morning, so he'd already been released at that point.
In fact, that same man spent less than 24 hours in jail 6 different times, with his shortest stint being 37 minutes. Villalobos is not the only one raising concerns about bail reform. During a press conference on how to improve public safety since the killing of LCPD officer Jonah Hernandez, Police Chief Jeremy Story said that addressing bail reform was a priority.
The premise was people should not be held in jail for minor offenses for 6 months, 8 months because of an inability to pay a small bond. And I don't disagree with that notion. The problem is we went from keeping potentially too many people in jail to keeping almost nobody in jail.
Doñana County Sheriff Kim Stewart shares a similar view. She says that while the original intent of not holding average people in jail because they cannot pay bail was good, the state has strayed from that.
We ended up with a very strict matrix about what they can release on and what they can't release on, and what can hold bail and what can't hold, what shouldn't have bail, right? And a lot of it centers on danger to the public, imminent danger. And so now we're at this very strange scenario where if you've beaten your wife or your husband, you're not considered a danger to the public.
If you're holding people and they are presumed innocent, you're holding people that are presumed innocent in jail. You're already really calling them guilty.
Many supporters, like District Defender Chris Knutson, says that while bail reform may need some minor fixes, the overall system is a step in the right direction.
Before 2016, you would have people that were probably a danger to the community in some cases, but the judge would issue a $20,000, $50,000 bond, and some of those people would bond out. So we had people who might have been dangers to the community and they had a long criminal record, and they were released into the community. Now that isn't occurring.
A study done by the University of New Mexico in 2022 also showed that there was no statistically significant rise in reoffending after bail reform was introduced. Supporters of bail reform point to this as an example of how bail reform is being used as a scapegoat for bigger issues.
A lot of crime is because of homelessness and poverty, and I don't think the solution is to put all those people in jail. Most of those offenses are either criminal damage to property or trespassing, and I'm also concerned about that, but I don't think the solution is just to put everybody in jail who's homeless and is suffering from some sort of mental health issue.
Knudsen also says that the old system of bail reform got rid of people's ability to be presumed innocent. But for people like Vic Villalobos, bail reform is the issue.
Let's lobby for ending bail reform and getting it back to criminals off the street.
One option New Mexico lawmakers took to strike a balance on bail reform comes in Senate Bill 271. The bill states that if a person is charged with a felony and then is released, and then gets charged with a new felony, they have to be held until they see all judges in their cases. The governor signed the bill on March 4th. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Noah Race.
Joining me now in the KRWG TV studios is the Las Cruces Police Chief Jeremy Story. Chief Story, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So just to get into the conversation, I wanted to talk about bail reform. Essentially, how confident are you in the state legislature in terms of getting something done when it comes to bail reform?
I have more hope now than I have in the past, and I think this past session they got Senate Bill 271 passed, which the no bond hold for repeat felony offenders, and so that's a step in the right direction for bail reform. So that's already encouraging that passed. It was signed into law. It hasn't taken effect quite yet, but so they already understand the need to do something different. It's just a matter of what that is. So I think that's half the battle is for people on both sides of the aisle to recognize that we need to take a look at this, and then it's just a matter of determining what is the solution.
And you mentioned Bill 271, which essentially would make it for someone on there that gets a second felony charge essentially to be held until they see all the judges involved in the cases. How much do you think that would actually make a difference here in Las Cruces? Do you think it could make a difference?
It can. It's a very complicated system, especially in Doña County. We have a case management rule from the Supreme Court that sets very strict timelines for cases and other rules that the district attorney has to follow that don't exist in any other place except for Bernalillo County. So it's just these two districts. And because of those strict guidelines, oftentimes a case will be filed and then dismissed to stop the clock so that they can gather all the discovery and evidence, and then they refile and go to grand jury and start the clock again. If that case is dismissed, let's say someone gets arrested for a felony, they steal a car, get arrested. That case is filed and then dismissed to stop the clock, and then they get arrested for another felony. Well, if that case was dismissed, there's no pending felony to be held on. So in that case, it would not help us. The hope is that we can get to a place where we're not having to dismiss cases to meet those timelines, and then they would have a pending case, they would be held, and that would make a big difference because we have far too many people that are committing multiple felonies in a given year or before they go to trial. So they start stacking up pending felony cases.
And it, from an outsider's perspective, I mean, it seems like a good idea on paper that your ability to have money or your wealth shouldn't determine how long you're held in jail. But, in practice, it seems like there's just sort of a revolving door for a lot of these cases. What kind of conversations have you had with legislators at the state level? I know you mentioned you talked with Nathan Small when I asked you about this in the past, but have those conversations evolved?
I talked to Representative Small about many different things. This is one of them. And so I'm hoping to have follow-up conversations with him and other legislators in the interim. So they really haven't evolved because I haven't had those conversations with them since the last session. But I'm hoping to, so that we can get as much information of the reality on the ground that we're seeing from the law enforcement side, so they have the best information to go off of.
I see. And in terms of the support that you have from the city and the city council, have they been supportive of you in terms of lobbying for this kind of change? I know they can't, vote on the laws themselves, but have they been supportive in terms of, like I said, lobbying for that type of change to bail, the current bail system.
So this past session, there was a bill for competency, which is a separate issue, but is very much related. And really, you can't fix one without addressing the other. But there was a bill in both chambers that was supported and lobbied for by the city as a whole, the individual council members, our lobbyists for the city. And unfortunately, did not pass, and there's a number of reasons why. But I'm hoping that that bill comes back even better with some funding and some infrastructure behind it to carry it out this next session.
And there have been talks about a special session potentially, being to address these public safety concerns that you have and other ones as well. Would you support that special session?
It's a difficult question. On its face, I would say, of course. I mean, we need to deal with these public safety issues, and so the sooner we do that, the better. The reality is, again, it's complicated. There's anything that we do to address things like competency are going to require some major changes in the way we do things for mental health and substance abuse treatment and the court system. So those the funding would have to back up the bill, which may not happen in a special session. So I think in the interim, we have the opportunity to get all the work done so that the next session we have something that hopefully will pass very easily and will actually make a positive impact.
And addressing competency in terms of prosecuting criminal cases is a really complex issue that I feel like a lot of people aren't really aware of how that works essentially. So how when officers are making an arrest and whenever they are taken to be held, how is that even evaluated in those cases?
So anytime someone is charged with a crime, anybody involved can raise competency. The prosecutor, the defense, generally it's the defense attorney. And so what happens is if it's not already in district court, it's municipal court or magistrate court, it goes to district court, they order an evaluation, and if that person is found incompetent, it goes back down to whichever court to dismiss. That's what happens right now. And so the result of that, I'll give you just it's data, but it's one person as an anecdote. I have one person who has committed 35 separate felony offenses in the past 3 years, and every single one of them has been dismissed because of competency, which means there's been absolutely nothing that's happened. That person has burglarized hundreds of cars likely, if you look at just the statistics on arrest rates versus actual crimes committed in Las Cruces, stolen vehicles, battered officers, battered household members, done all indecent exposure, all kinds of things with no consequences, with no treatment. And so the hope is that whatever we do addresses that type of situation. And he's the worst one, but I have several people stacked right behind him with numbers that I think would appall most people.
And speaking of, a lot of this is tied to a lot of mental health issues within the community, and something that recently happened that's been affecting a lot of community members, at least in my own reporting, speaking with people, is the closure of the Crisis Triage Center. I was wondering, how has that affected your department, and how important is it to have, crisis care for individuals, and how does that affect your department?
So it has, I would say that it hasn't addressed these people that we're talking about for the most part, because the people that are that revolving door of crime tend to be the people that don't want to voluntarily get help. The Crisis Triage Center, as it operated, was only a voluntary center. We're moving towards taking involuntary, but that means an officer goes to a call and someone's either suicidal or has some type of, crisis. The officer talks to them and says, hey, there's this place I could take you to. They have all these resources. Would you be willing to go? And they say yes, and the officer would then transport them to the Crisis Triage Center. So it was all about cooperation and people wanting to get help, recognizing they're in crisis, which is a huge resource that we need. But I'm not sure how much it helped with the issues we're talking about today when it comes to bail reform and competency directly.
I see. And so in terms of something you laid out in one of the press conferences related to the death of Officer Jonah Hernandez was that you wanted to get some ordinances within the city of Las Cruces that makes it a safer place, ordinances that are constitutional, that are enforceable. I wanted to ask about that. Where are you with that, and what types of ordinances specifically, as much as you can talk about, would you like to see implemented in the city?
So we're working on two main ones right now, and we still don't have the draft I would call a good, solid draft, but we're making progress. The first one is just to redo or revise our current solicitation ordinance. People refer to it as panhandling ordinance, but ours is a solicitation ordinance because it applies across the board, not just people panhandling, it'd be for any solicitation. And really the main things we're trying to do is, one, help emphasize the fact that private property has the right to not allow people to solicit on their property. There is no First Amendment protection for solicitation on private property. And a lot of the problems we've had with panhandling or solicitation have occurred on private property. Gas stations, stores, grocery stores, other stores, where people are walking up to people's cars before they even get out or following them into the store. That's the kind of behavior I think that concerns people the most. So we want to address that in the ordinance, and then also with education of the public. The other area we have to clean up, because the way it exists is likely unconstitutional, is just around roadways. It has to be narrowly tailored for a public safety impact. And so kind of limiting the size of medians that people can be on, making sure people aren't going into the lanes of traffic. We can't keep people from soliciting on sidewalks or where they're not obstructing anything or presenting a public safety danger. There is a First Amendment right to that. So it's just making sure that the language matches what how the Constitution has been interpreted for that one.
And Chief Story, something, I think there might be some people out there who are worried about these types of ordinances, essentially criminalizing homelessness. So what's your message to those folks in terms of addressing those issues?
Yeah, so let me give if I could, give me my second one, because the second one gets that response a lot more often,
okay, sure.
And then I'll kind of address it for both. The second ordinance we're working on is a shopping cart ordinance. Currently, taking a shopping cart, or stealing a shopping cart from a business is a crime. It's larceny. We could already prosecute people for possessing that stolen property, receiving and transferring stolen property, under current ordinance. The shopping cart ordinance does a couple things. One, it puts a little bit of responsibility on the businesses to help us prevent the theft. And so there's some things they have to do to help prevent the theft, reporting, recovering abandoned carts. And that the reason we're doing that, and it also makes possession of the shopping cart off premise a crime, but it's already a crime. It's really not creating a new crime, although it's just called something different under a different ordinance. If you look around, I can show you videos of people with 15, 20 carts, one person, full of things that are objectively trash, cardboard and stuff that came out of a trash can. And that's one of the consequences of mental illness and often meth use, is this kind of hoarding behavior of trash. But if someone drives by and sees that person with 15 to 20 carts full of trash, do they think that's one person who's homeless? No, they think that's 10, 15 people. And so it takes a problem that is bad, it's something we need to address, and it makes it seem even worse. And so the perception in the community is that it's worse. It makes our city look less safe, less clean. And so addressing that would, I think, go a long way. That doesn't mean we're gonna take people's property and do anything with it other than leave it with them or retain it for safekeeping, depending on the circumstances. It doesn't mean we're gonna take people to jail for having a shopping cart. That wouldn't happen even under the current ordinances. We don't take people to jail for nonviolent misdemeanors generally. It would just give us an opportunity to help address an issue that does impact perception and the cleanliness and the safety of the city. When people say, well, we're creating a new ordinance that targets homeless people, it's really not, because it's already a crime. What we're doing is putting a little bit of responsibility on the businesses to help us make it manageable, and then we're doing something that hopefully will ultimately plug them into services. And so with municipal court, we're working on that program where all petty misdemeanors, there's the option to kind of plug them into services. And so if someone ended up getting cited for the shopping cart ordinance, which would not be the first thing we would do education, we would do other things, but if they get cited, that ultimately becomes an opportunity then to plug them into the services that they need, that they may not have sought out voluntarily.
I see. And so in terms of, getting people the help they need, and you've, in interviews with me in the past, you've talked about using, potential crimes committed as a way to spur people into treatment. How effective do you think that could really be in terms of essentially getting a lot of people back up on their feet, clean and sober, and hopefully into stable living situations?
I think it could be, well, it depends on how you define effectiveness, but it's definitely going to be more effective than doing nothing. If you look at assisted outpatient treatment programs like in New York, there's studies that will find that those programs are more successful sometimes than voluntary treatment. And so right now we're doing nothing. We have all this crime with zero consequence. All we're asking for is to kind of have a middle ground where these people that are either mentally ill or have a substance use disorder, or oftentimes both, there isn't nothing, there's some type of treatment, there's some type of mandated consequence that hopefully will help that person. It should be a win-win for everybody. I'm confident that it will be effective.
And you know, in interviews in the past, you've also, well, this is one part of your agenda that you set after the killing of Officer Jonah Hernandez was, you know, addressing the fentanyl crisis that we're having. I mean, you spoke about it took you years. I think you said it took you years to even run into like heroin when you were first a police officer. Is that correct? And now fentanyl is everywhere. And with the rise of that, it's been a rise of essentially everything else in correlation with that in terms of homelessness and other sorts of property crimes being committed. So what is your message to state level legislatures in terms of dealing with this issue?
Well, it's not easy. There's no doubt in my mind that if you want to look at what has caused our current situation, which is many different things, but the number one driver has been fentanyl. When you overlay the numbers for fentanyl seizures when it came to Las Cruces, it wasn't here, and then it hit us in the face and it was everywhere. And you look at our rise in crime and really our rise in homelessness, they overlay perfectly. So not all crime is related to fentanyl, but a large proportion of it is. So there is no easy answer. It's a multifaceted approach. We have to treat it as both a public health issue and a public safety or law enforcement issue. If someone is using fentanyl and not causing any harm to anyone else, not committing crimes, that is ultimately their right to do, technically, although it's an illegal substance, but using the substance is not illegal in New Mexico. But when they're out committing crimes in order to purchase it, or they're committing crimes as a result of being under the influence of that drug, that is a public safety or law enforcement issue. And we need to deal with it from both angles and in coordination. And I think that's the key.
And so, you know, there is some money coming down from pharmaceutical companies to the states, you know, to many states, including New Mexico and Doña Ana County. You know, what would you say, what's the best way to spend that money in terms of essentially curbing this crisis?
It's ultimately not that much money that both the city and the county are getting. And so what I would say is that if we spread that out too far, we'll have very little effect. So we need to choose what we want to concentrate it on and put it towards that end goal.
And I want to move on, Chief Story. Essentially, I wanted to ask about the Real-Time Crime Center, because that's something that really caught my eye. For individuals who might not know what that is, can you just lay it out for us? What would that look like in the city of Las Cruces?
I like having pictures because I could show a picture and it's really easy for people to see what I'm talking about, but I'll explain it.
And we can have you send us some pictures,
okay.
So actually that would be great. But yeah, go ahead and describe it for us.
And there's several different models that exist throughout the country. But imagine the Real-Time Crime Center, the actual location in the station, would be a room that has consoles where people work with their own computers and monitors. And then there's a bunch of monitors or TVs on a wall. And it does several things. What they're trying to do is actively monitor for crime in the city. And so one example I give to help prevent crime is the downtown cameras that are being installed. You know, if there's nobody monitoring them, all they're going to do is try to help us solve whoever broke that window or broke into that house or assaulted that person or battered that person. But with the Real-Time Crime Center, you have somebody that could be watching it and hopefully see that crime either about to occur or as it occurs and send an officer to stop it. Obviously, when crime does occur, it allows us resources with cameras at traffic intersections, parks, downtown, to then go back and try to get evidence to solve that crime and prosecute the person responsible.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask a little, you know, this seems like, obviously it's a good tool for the department, but I think a lot of folks would be worried about privacy concerns or civil rights concerns, essentially. What's your response to that?
Well, and I don't blame them for that. I mean, especially when they don't have direct control or knowledge of what's occurring. I mean, I feel the same way about certain things with technology. What I would say is right now that exists, whether you like it or not. That's the society that we live in right now. There's cameras everywhere, and you are being recorded most of the time you're in a public space, whether you want to be or not. The way I see it is we might as well use those resources to help keep people safe and to solve crime so that so victims have some type of closure and accountability for the people that abuse or victimize them.
I see. And we don't have a lot of time left, Chief Story, but I did want to ask about one other of the other parts of your agenda that you laid out, is making Las Cruces a more attractive place for law enforcement officers to work, to essentially pull in more talent because there are shortages there. So what can we do, what can the city do to help fill that gap?
And I've kind of laid that out. I mean, the city obviously be competitive in wages, which is difficult. Everyone's kind of doing that same thing. And there's only so much money to go around. And money is only one piece of the puzzle. I think creating an environment, a city where law enforcement feels respected and valued goes a long way. And like I said, there's a small pool of people who are qualified and want to be police officers, and they get to shop around. They're going to find the jurisdiction or the agency that fits them best. And so we have to make LCPD the most attractive agency in the area to draw the most people. And that's kind of a responsibility for me, my department, the city as an organization, and the city as a community.
And Chief Story, again, we don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to ask about, the death of Officer Jonah Hernandez was obviously distressful and a traumatic thing for the community as a whole. I was wondering if, in the past, in one of the February 12th press conference, you said that Silva killed Hernandez essentially for no reason. I was wondering if there's been any development in terms of figuring out any sort of motive related to that.
No, none whatsoever.
There has not been none,
No.
or there has not been any?
No.
Okay. Well, and like I said, this was a very traumatic thing that happened in the community, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a platform. What is your message to the folks of Las Cruces and to the officers in your department in terms of moving forward into the future?
Well, one, it's helped us recognize how much, both in the department, we need and care about each other, and also the community. And that's been one of the few positive things that have come out of this. We have to continue that. We can't let that fade. We don't need another tragedy to remind us of those things. And when we are united like that doesn't mean we agree on everything, but when we are united, that's how we get stuff done, to actually make positive change.
Jeremy Story is the chief of the Las Cruces Police Department. Chief Story, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today's episode. Remember, you can stay up to date on the latest local news at krwg.org. For all of us here at KRWG Public Media, I'm Jonny Coker. We'll see you next time on Fronteras, A Changing America.